October 9th, 1994. Somewhere near the coast of Sumatra, an airplane is down. Hours earlier, a passing airliner reported that the plane was on fire and that 3 men had survived the crash. But the biplane was carrying 4. Now, above it, a rescue team circles, but all they can see is a blinking flashlight and some letters across the wings. G-E-A-O-U. God help all of us. That's what they said it meant 75 years ago, when it was making aviation history. The waning days of World War I. A little more than 16 years have passed since the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk. Yet now, in the skies over France, airplanes are everywhere. The men who fly them are considered heroes, because so many don't come back. Among the pilots who do survive is a 26-year-old Australian named Ross Smith. As he prepares for the dull routine of peacetime, he hears about a contest that will change his life.
The Australian government has decided to offer £10,000 for the first successful flight from London to Australia in a machine manned by Australians.
Smith decides to accept the challenge and convinces his brother Keith to come along as navigator on a converted bomber called a Vickers Vimy. Big, slow, and sturdy, the Vimy can travel 800 miles between refuelings and carry up to 4 men. The Smith brothers chart a course that will take them across stretches of desert, mountains, and oceans, stopping among people who have never even seen an airplane. In the public mind, their chances of success are slim. But if the Vimy does make it, it will show the world that air travel is the wave of the future. Three-quarters of a century later, the Vimy is preparing to fly again.
We're talking like 40,000 pounds.
In a warehouse near San Francisco, a replica of the old biplane is being assembled for another flight from England to Australia, over the same route followed by the Smith brothers.
Goes forward a little bit.
Yep, started. Yeah, as long as I can see the line, which we don't slip.
The project is the brainchild of 2 men.
Oh, yeah, look.
Lang Kidby is a retired Australian Army pilot with a passion for antique planes.
Almost lines up right where...
American stockbroker Peter McMillan loves to fly so much, he's invested his life savings in the project.
Tell me.
The first thing I think of when I think of the fuselage and the guys that originally touched it was the time when they were in Pisa, and Bennett had to get off to shove them, and he came running along right here, and he grabbed like that, and they had to haul him aboard the fuselage. Yeah. Exactly. You know, we're actually following the original plans as closely as we possibly can. We've had to modernize a few things using some steel where they used wood before, but essentially the dimensions are going to be exactly the same as the original. More than anything else, I think I've got sort of a fascination with being able to really experience what life was like in another time, and this is really the closest we will ever have to a true time machine and be able to turn back the clock 75 years ago.
On the original Vimy, the cloth was stitched onto the fuselage by hand. They're using the same techniques today. The only significant difference between this Vimy and its forerunner lies in its power plant. Instead of using Rolls-Royce engines, the replica will rely on a pair of Chevy V8s.
He can't finish up over the weekend?
Two computers and their backups will regulate the flow of fuel.
Easy, easy.
It's taken 2 years and over $1 million to get this far. But both pilots think the Smith brothers' story is worth remembering.
Well, I think the flight of the Vimy was really one of the most important flights in history. The aircraft covered that huge distance. No one thought it was capable of doing that. It was all looked on as a stunt. Very few people believed those aeroplanes would ever arrive in Australia. And this is one of the reasons that Peter and I decided to do it, because of the lack of publicity that Ross has got, probably for the most important flight ever after the Wright brothers.
July 30th, 1994. The Vimy prepares to fly for the first time. In the back of everyone's mind is a disturbing bit of history. 25 years ago, another replica of a Vimy burst into flames while still sitting on the ground. No one knows why. The same test pilot will be at the Vimy's controls for this flight. Lang will accompany him as co-pilot. The fate of the entire project is riding on what happens next. The Vimy has passed the first test. It can fly.
The first time I saw it fly, I was extremely nervous because, after all that work, after a year and a half of work, and what John and Danny and Wayne, after what they'd gone through, if anything had gone wrong in the first flight, it would have been a mortal blow.
Over the next few weeks, Peter and Lang take turns at the controls, getting used to the biplane's idiosyncrasies. Her slow reaction to changes in rudder and ailerons. The way she bounces over turbulence, like a sailboat over waves. But the real test is yet to come. In the unpredictable autumn weather now gathering in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. On an airstrip outside of London, the Smith brothers prepare to leave England. The weather is completely unfit for flying, but they feel they have no choice. Other competitors have already departed, and they can't risk falling any further behind. Only a handful of well-wishers is there to watch the takeoff. The 30-day countdown has started. September 1994. The second flight of the Vimy is about to get underway.
They're not dragging on the ground, are they?
This time, over a dozen people and 2 additional airplanes will shadow the Vimy on her journey.
Okay, I had to refile new flight plans. Here's Vimy 2.
Operations manager Mark Rebholz must handle flight clearances out of 36 airports in 16 countries.
Like the time en route and all that stuff.
Pilot Mick Reynolds will shadow the Vimy in an Australian Army Nomad. Mechanic Dan Nelson must keep the Vimy running every day for the next month. National Geographic photographer Jim Stanfield will be a frequent passenger in the nose gunner's seat.
Brooklyn's crew!
Peter and Lang will do the flying, wedged into a space that barely allows them to move their legs.
Peter, can I ask you to both wear goggles?
Where's the top?
Finally, after 2 years of preparation, it's time for takeoff.
One, the Boeing 747 is now at 4 miles. When ready, you're clear for takeoff, en route to Australia. To quote, one small step for a 747 and one giant leap for a Vickers Vimy. Have a safe journey now.
Thank you so much, sir. Here he is, Raleigh.
The first leg of the flight is only about 350 miles, to a tiny airfield southeast of Paris in the town of Troyes. The world today is a very different place than it was in 1919. Political borders have shifted. Airspace is restricted. Skies that once were empty are crisscrossed by everything from 747s to F-14s. The one thing that is the same is the feel of the Vickers Vimy.
It's an amazing feeling having your life relying on an ancient machine like this. It's a very physical airplane to fly, and obviously, you get a lot of your clues from the wind going through your hair, and you know if the plane is side-slipping or if you're going too fast or too slow, and you don't even really need an airspeed indicator. You can tell it all by just the breeze blowing over you. It's a very powerful feeling because it's so big and stately and heavy, and you can tell that it was meant for war. It was meant for rough fields and difficult conditions and all the hazards that obviously Ross Smith would encounter, and it really feels like you're part of the past. Yeah, no, I haven't had anything to eat all day.
There's a neatly folded map, Mick.
Whoa!
Dan, you okay back there?
3,000 feet, I was freezing my ass.
Boy, we all.
Hello, Studio 1A in Broadcasting House. This is Sean Maffett. And we've crossed the channel without too much incident. And we're now in Troyes, in northern France. This is our first night stop. I'm really amazed that this thing has actually got underway. I mean, it is such an extraordinary project. The Vimy seems to be working perfectly, and I think with any luck, in about a month's time, the Vimy will have got to Australia with us with it.
For the Smith brothers, the first few days in the skies over Europe are extremely disheartening. Rain and sleet dog them every step of the way. It's so cold in the cockpit, their sandwiches freeze. An entry in Ross Smith's diary sums it up. I'm a silly ass for having ever embarked on the flight. On day 2, Peter and Lang may be thinking the same thing. The weather is miserable.
Bad weather is extremely uncomfortable. You know, you're sitting there motionless for hour after hour, so there's really no way you can move around and warm yourself up. You can't straighten your legs, you can't really straighten your arms. The rain is stinging on your face, and you develop a very hazardous sort of fatigue.
That fatigue is compounded if the plane isn't performing well, and on this day, it's not. The Vimy is having trouble gaining altitude. The pilots suspect its cloth covering is becoming waterlogged, adding hundreds of pounds of extra weight. They're in a valley surrounded by mountains they can't climb over. For 2 anxious hours, they search for an opening through the cloud-covered peaks. But there is no way out. They are trapped. Then, they spot a small airstrip near the top of a mountain.
Clouds, and clouds rain. We can't climb. We had just too much weight on board. We cannot climb. We were getting lucky to get 150 foot a minute. What was the best we were getting? 150 foot a minute.
That was when we were real low. We're down to 50 foot a minute at the end there.
As they stake the Vimy down for the night, it becomes clear that the rain is doing more than just weighing the plane down. The Vimy's propellers are showing signs of erosion, and that's not good.
The propeller tips are actually going at about 600 miles an hour, so the rain's working on us just like sandpaper. But as importantly, we'll start soaking in water, and these props will get out of balance, and the vibrations can end up shaking the engines to bits. We've got to find a way to stay out of the rain.
For the competitors in the first race to Australia, the expectations of an airplane's performance were far different than they are today. Flying was a high-stakes game. Takeoffs were dangerous. Landings were dangerous. Everything connected with flying was dangerous. And in 1919, the flying game was taking its toll on the Vimy's competition. Of the 6 official entrants to the race, every plane except the Vimy crashed. 2 crews were killed. But the problem wasn't the pilots. It was the planes.
Jesus Christ, we had a bit of 10-knot tailwind there. We had a hell of a tailwind.
On what should be a short flight from Pisa to Rome, the Vimy shows her limitations. Headwinds batter the plane so fiercely it almost starts to fly backwards. The pilots have no choice but to return to Pisa.
No, we'll do the other two, but we're stuffing around here. We can get another 15, 20 mile an hour. Let's go for it.
Righto, thanks a lot. The wind's just too strong. We had 4 knots ground speed, 4 miles an hour. Would take us 50 hours to get to Rome.
It was howling. You could see the whitecaps, and this thing was bucking. It was. What do you think, Dan?
I was getting lifted out of my seat.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ian and
Good
Gary,
thing come back.
keep checking the weather. We're mostly interested now in the winds. As soon as we got about 800 feet high, the winds.
Shortly after noon, the winds on the ground begin to pick up as well. The skies darken.
Yeah, whenever you know where the
Oh yeah, we were up that night. Yeah, there's no problem.
A freak storm is moving in. When the storm strikes, no one knows if the ropes will hold. The airplane's tremendous lift is now working against her.
Hello, I'm Sean Maffitt. This is Pisa in Italy. We're in the eye of an incredible storm with 4 inches of rain in half an hour. But the rain isn't the real problem, it's the wind. There are trees down all round, and the Vimy is really at risk. I was standing by her when a gust hit just now, and her wheels actually lifted off the ground. Without everyone holding her down, she could be flipped over and destroyed in a moment.
The storm passes over, but they can see another front approaching fast. Peter and Lang make a snap decision to untie the plane and move it to a hangar. It's over a mile away. They don't have much time.
If it hadn't been for the really fast action of Dan and Mark and Mick Reynolds and the other guys, who secured the airplane very quickly, the thing would have been on its back and ended up in somebody's backyard. That was almost the end of the project right there.
Over the next few days, the Vimy flies down the Italian peninsula, across the Adriatic to Greece, and finally to the port of Suda Bay in Crete. From here, they will attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea. It will take about 5 hours to reach Africa. Plenty of time for something to go wrong.
Well, I wonder if we went in the water, if these things would float, or if they'd actually
They float for a short period
take us to the
until
bottom.
I got waterlogged.
then they take us to the bottom.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to get off.
Time to get out of.
I don't think I'm going to button mine all the way.
Leave it.
I think I'm going to leave it open a little bit just in case. You know, we've got a long way to go over water, but you know, at least we got radios and we've got a raft. Smith Brothers, all they had was a couple of inner tubes, and actually they only had those for a while because as soon as they got up in the air, they expanded and they almost pushed the guys out right out of the cockpit.
This is our longest unavoidable overwater flight, in fact. There are longer ones later on, straight line, but we can actually vary them with a bit of a dogleg to pick up land a bit sooner.
Obviously, when the Smith Brothers launched out from here, they had no air traffic control services. If they fell in the ocean, no one knew that they were going to be there, and they could well have drowned before a passing fishing boat found them. We've got the satellite navigation system, which really helps us. Air traffic control get very excited, particularly going to places like Egypt, and we're running very, very close to the Libyan border here. We don't really want to finish up in Benghazi this afternoon.
This is the, you know, the penalty for error on this leg will be greater than any other leg because it'll be, you know, it'll be difficult to execute a rescue. Obviously, the plane's got to perform well. You know, if we have a bad landing, crash landing on land, you know, we'll have some wreckage to mourn over. But if we lose an engine today, then everything, the whole idea will disappear. How does this work anyway?
Very high.
On every flight over water, there's a point of no return. Once you pass it, there's no going back. The Vimy crosses that line about 3 hours out. The rest is up to the plane, the winds, and the pilots. And 50 minutes after takeoff, they spot land. The Vimy has passed its most important test so far. For modern travelers accustomed to flying, it's hard to imagine a time when looking down at the world was considered astonishing, and an aerial photograph was a revelation.
The Smith Brothers and their crew, they were seeing a lot of the world for the first time from the air. Obviously, they made the first aerial photographs of many of the world's great landmarks. The Vimy is giving us such an incredible privilege to float so leisurely past the great monuments of the world.
But in 1919, the airspace above the pyramids wasn't restricted. Today, it is. And that leads to a moment the Smith brothers never faced. A zealous Egyptian air defense officer spots the Vimy and her escorts circling the tombs of the pharaohs and requests permission to shoot them down. The request is denied, but the Egyptian bureaucracy, which has been around even longer than the pyramids, is furious at the airborne interlopers. The reprisal comes the next day in a blizzard of red tape. the Vimy is grounded most of the morning. To complicate matters, a blanket of fog is rolled in.
Well, as long as you can see the ground stay straight down, then you just can kind of keep turning left a little bit.
Doubts about this now. Look at this.
Well, I spent all my life as a kid wanting to get to Egypt, and now I just want to get out of here. When Ross and Keith Smith came through here, and they had some advantages that we don't have. At that stage, there weren't any control towers. There weren't any landing fees, take-off fees, handling fees, navigation fees, communication fees, tower opening fees, electricity fees, and all the other fees that we now have to pay. So in lots of ways, they might have pioneered the route, but I think they had it real easy.
I really do think if we can just get out of Cairo and into Saudi Arabia, at least we're going to have a little more help from the...
The delay cost them a day. The Vimy will take off tomorrow. As the Vimy heads east, Arab hospitality begins to assume its more traditional forms. Wherever they land, the travelers are greeted warmly, in a blur of receptions and press conferences.
Thank you very much, and we're very pleased to be here.
Really happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Upon us. This has been a fantastic afternoon. I was talking to one of the horsemen, and I went up and just shook him by the hand and said, what a wonderful day. And he said that traditional Arab greeting. He said, my country is your country.
The Vimy reaches Pakistan, and yet another welcoming committee. Everyone is exhausted, but their resolve is about to be tested once again.
In the neighbouring state of Maharashtra, new cases of bubonic plague have also been reported, but no deaths have been attributed so far to that disease.
The news isn't good. An outbreak of the plague in India is causing a panic. Flights in and out of the country are being stopped.
Decided to not allow international flights in and out of Bombay at this time. And because of the proximity of...
The Vimy's dilemma is compounded by another factor. The bureaucracies of Pakistan and India seem to enjoy making life difficult for each other.
They want the panic about the plague contained.
This time, it's the Vimy that's caught in the middle.
The way the whole mess started. The original clearance was from Karachi to Delhi on an established airway that went up to a point up in this area and then proceed at our leisure up to Delhi, which would have worked perfectly.
The Indians didn't want that. The Indians gave us a clearance from crossing the border here up to Delhi.
So we have an Indian clearance from here to here and a Pakistan clearance from here to here.
So obviously we had about a 300-mile gap between the two border crossings.
So here we are in the middle of the day, the sun's going down, and nothing's done.
Shortly before dawn, the next morning, after long negotiations, the necessary permissions have been obtained. The Vimy has finally been cleared to enter India. From the air, at least, India couldn't be less threatening. Over the city of Agra, they circled the Taj Mahal, which Ross Smith called a matchless white jewel reclining in a setting of nature's emeralds. At the Delhi airport, the Vimy is greeted by dozens of school
We're
children.
leaving tomorrow. Yeah, so leaving tomorrow at sunrise, so you'll see us fly overhead if you get up early.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you. They've read all the stuff. They read the press kits. More kids on the way?
Next stop, Myanmar, known as Burma when the Smith brothers stopped there. It is a country that has welcomed few visitors in the last 30 years, and now it has closed its borders to all incoming flights from India. The Vimy support planes are in the air when they hear the news. They ask Myanmar to make a special exception in their case. The Nomad is running low on fuel when the answer comes back.
Subsequently, we've been told that permission to land at Yangon has also been denied, so we're now in the situation where we have nowhere to go except onwards.
The pilots shut down one engine to save fuel. Ordered to turn back, they pretend their radio is having trouble receiving transmissions. Part of the crew sits at an open door, keeping an eye out for jet fighters. Myanmar has a reputation for defending its borders. When they land in Yangon, no one quite knows what kind of reception to expect. The crew is hustled into quarantine, but it's not as bad as they feared.
Do you have any fever?
No fevers.
Cough?
No, just
Nothing?
tired from a long flight, yes.
Fine. Everything okay?
Yes, I'm feeling fine, yes.
Please wait a minute, sir.
Yeah.
You next.
Next.
But I guess the plague story's over now. Everyone's been through a health check here at Yangon.
Any fever?
And everyone's had their glands felt, which is the nicest thing that's happened to us in about a month. And the plague story's finished.
Well, good thing we got here just before sunset. About an hour ago when the sun hits, it was really spectacular.
For the first time in weeks, Peter and Lang take time to sightsee at the Shui Dagon Temple. The city hasn't changed much since the Smith brothers touched down on a racetrack, the first airplane ever to land in Rangoon. This profoundly Buddhist country is a good place for the weary traveler to rest and contemplate the long road still ahead.
I think the main thing is from now on, I think we're going to be very much in command of the expedition, and I think we'll be able to sort of set the pace, and I think we'll have a minimum of headaches, bureaucracy, and things like that. So, I think we're the whole path will be a lot smoother from here on.
Famous last words. With less than a week to go until they reach Australia, the Vimy's starboard engine begins to act up. It's burning too much oil and seems sluggish. Probably nothing to worry about, as long as there's a flat place to land.
Yeah, all those problems we had yesterday were all fuel variations.
The crew fiddles with the engine every time the Vimy's on the ground.
We thought it was it. Was.
So, there's plugs after the way the thing was running.
No one can quite figure out what or how serious the problem is.
It was running like hell.
It's not even, it won't run out, gravity feed. It's just no fuel running out of it at all. But probably with the pumps there, they're sucking it through the bloody fuel.
What do you think's going wrong with this thing? What? I mean, because it seems to me like if we got the oil pressure down below 65 pounds, we might stop the consumption.
We can't do that.
We can't?
We can't adjust the oil pressure.
The right gearbox seems to be getting warmer all the time, and we don't really know if it's vibration related or just the gearbox itself is breaking in, or I don't really know what the problem is with the gearbox, but we're going to go ahead and go anyway. I don't think there's anything unsafe about it. But like I said, we don't have good single engine performance, so we lose power over the water. We got a problem.
The problem begins to manifest itself the very next day.
This right prop is really vibrating like a son of a bitch. maybe it's my imagination, but it looks to me like it's gotten worse. Seems to be, yeah.
They're losing altitude fast. The Vimy has to land, now, anywhere.
Can we take one of those left computers and just put it over on the right engine?
Once again, everyone can only guess at what's causing the starboard engine to malfunction.
Computer problem. I think it's something to do with the connections because they're both reacting in the same way. It just doesn't seem like a computer problem to me. You know, the computer's a bit like it either works or it doesn't work.
Eventually, they decide to remap the computers. And there's nothing to do but continue on to Singapore. Neither pilot wants to admit it, but they're beginning to lose confidence in their plane. The Smith Brothers Vimy, on the other hand, is still running well, as long as it's in the air. It's being on the ground that's causing problems. In Surabaya, the Vimy becomes hopelessly stuck in the mud. But with the help of the locals, they're able to build a makeshift runway out of bamboo, borrowed from the walls of the villagers' huts. Australia is less than a week away.
Put all 4 pumps on.
Okay, are you sure? We don't want to run too much air through that pump. If it's only...
That's it. Turn it off.
Turn it off. Airplanes are moody, you know, they're like people, and they have good moods and bad moods, and she's definitely been in a bad mood. And actually, yesterday was a downright foul mood. Most of them are, you know, circumstances that are, you know, they've gone beyond minor complaints to, you know, out-and-out arguments. I wish it was running like it was before. I mean, we've done everything we can today. We've gone right through everything. We changed the oil filters, changed fuel filters, changed all the spark plugs. It's just, like I said, she's in a bad mood, and it, you know, been riding hard.
Next stop, Jakarta. Peter will be at the controls, with Lang beside him and Dan Nelson in the rear. Jim Stanfield will sit on the nose of the plane. The Vimy heads south, over fields being clear-cut and burned. The visibility is terrible. It's even hard to breathe. It's supposed to be a 7-hour flight, but the Vimy never shows up.
This is Jakarta. The Vimy has crashed. Apparently, what we know at the moment is that it's about 150 miles from here. The aircraft itself is apparently a burnt-out wreck.
The Mayday call was picked up shortly after 3 in the afternoon. A Singapore Airlines pilot reports that the Vimy is on fire and adds a chilling footnote. There are 3 survivors, but the Vimy was carrying 4. It has taken hours to round up the crew and get the Nomad airborne.
We just want to know if we can get away today because we need to get out there quickly.
The area behind the crash site is forested.
Back at the airport, the rest of the crew waits for news.
The only thing the Indonesians are trying to determine right now here is whether it's 3 people or 4 people.
The sun is already beginning to slip below the horizon as the Nomad approaches the area where the Vimy went down. Smoke blankets the ground. Soon it will be dark. And they don't even know what they're looking for.
We've left the twinkling lights of Jakarta behind us and we're heading up into the black open country for this hour-and-a-half journey.
And then, faintly, the disembodied shape of a wing.
And suddenly, there she is. We're flying a few hundred feet above the ground. There's a little mist, and suddenly this extraordinary sight of the top wing of the Vimy just poking out through the mist. We can see those letters, G-E-A-O-U, Gord El Ball of Us, as they said back in 1919, standing out as clear as anything, and a twinkling light, somebody down at the aircraft, flashing a light at us as we fly past.
Moments later, Mick raises Peter on the radio. The news couldn't be better. All 4 men have escaped the crash without so much as a scratch.
The aircraft's okay. The right engine's completely shattered. Apparently it's completely blown up and it has to be replaced.
Are you going to carry on with your mission?
Of course.
Okay, do you know how long that will take, approximately?
4 or 5 days.
4 or 5 days.
Did you think we'd give up?
It has taken 2 days to carve a temporary airstrip out of the rice paddy so the support planes can land. But they've had a lot of help. The downed Vimy has become a major attraction among local villagers. This will be the first time the pilots have seen the rest of their crew.
Yesterday.
Did you really?
Yeah. Just trying to hack out the airstrip and trying to, you know, get the motor out with just these pitiful little hand tools.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. We need
Yeah, no, it was a very, very bad landing.
No, it was no indication really, and the engine just stopped dead. We couldn't get it going again, so we had to pick somewhere to land. We picked this road.
That's the road back over there, and we got close to the road that looked like we were going to be able to land in it. By the time we got close to it, there was no way we could land it. It had a ditch, big ditch on either side.
I was really worried about Jim because Jim was in the nose. Jim was taking pictures through the whole thing, and I kept saying, "Jim, sit down. Jim, sit down. Jim, sit down. You know, get your belts on. We're gonna crash." You know, and he wouldn't listen.
And I buckled up, and the only thing I could do was to turn that camera backwards and start shooting them from back. And you could see that one prop was stopped, and Lang had taken his glasses off, and that's probably the only thing that worried me because Lang never takes his Ray-Bans off.
So I just said, we're going to go in the field. Lang said, no, don't go in the field. I said, well, we got to go in the field. So I had a power, and then the thing just slewed to the right really strongly.
About 360 feet later, we came to a stop. I mean, all in one piece. I mean, it was, as Jim put it, incredible.
Now we need to find some way to get a backhoe or something to get the engine out.
Yeah.
And then we'll, yeah.
Good job, man.
No engine in.
Good job.
You should, well, it's a mess, isn't it?
The Vimy in the rice paddy is the biggest thing ever to hit this isolated section of Sumatra. Vendors do a brisk business in sodas and popsicles. There's even a viewing stand.
These people just stare to their hard skin tent. It's unbelievable. It really is.
What do you use to get it off with, Dan?
Which one, the big bolt? Yeah. Fair pliers, bead on it.
We are joining you from what I'm sure is an absolute first for Radio 5. We're near a place called Dalang Batu in southeastern Sumatra, and we're at an airfield, would you believe? I'm standing beside the Vimy. A few days ago, this was just scrubland. It is now an airfield. I'm going to ask Lang Kidby formally to declare this open. Lang.
Well, I'll do that, Sean. With the authority vested in me by nobody, I hereby declare Vimy Field open for use.
Here we go. The Vimy is starting her takeoff run. She's got the tail wheel up, and she's coming towards us. She's airborne. She climbs away. A huge cloud of dust envelops us all, and she's airborne. GEAOU flies out of Dalang Batu after 4 days here, stuck for an engine failure. What a wonderful sight.
After 3 days of repairs in Jakarta, the Vimy moves east over the islands of Indonesia. Touchdown on the island of Timor. The next landing will be in Australia.
I don't know. Well, today's really it's a culmination of several years' work. You know, for everybody that's been involved. You know, I think that, you know, we got ourselves so caught up in the day-to-day operations of getting the plane. I know it seems like a year ago that we were in France and Pisa and all those events that happened. You know, just can't be distracted by, you know, the greater things. We have to consider the lesser things, which is we have to move this airplane another 454 miles over water.
As long as people want to spend their money on something other than wine, women and song and recreate history, I think it's money well spent. And as I pointed out to Peter, when he's on his deathbed, all the Ferraris out the front of his house don't matter a damn. But look back on the challenges that he accepted and the things that he did, and that's where the satisfaction will be.
When I first saw the coast of Australia, it was the most powerful feeling of relief that we had succeeded and that the project, it wasn't one of those great ideas that might have been, that in fact, throughout all the adversity, we had done it. We had created a time machine, and we had seen the world as no one else had in 75 years.
When the Smith brothers Vimy touched down in Darwin on December 10th, 1919, it became the first plane from another country ever to land in Australia. The flight had taken them just under 28 days. The 10,000 pounds, worth about $500,000 today, was theirs.
And there she is, she's touched down on Australian soil. The scene is
Ross Smith divides the prize equally with his brother and the two mechanics. They are greeted as national heroes, having proved that a machine used mostly for destruction could help bring people together as well.
As far as I'm concerned, that you know, we won the 10,000 pounds.
For Peter and Lang and the rest of the Vimy crew, the rewards are different. Their flight offers us a reminder of what goes into all great human endeavors: vision, courage, ingenuity, persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. Without these things, history would never be made or worth remembering.